Are we ready to start? Yes. Great. On behalf of the History and Archives Committee, we want to welcome you here this afternoon. I'm so happy to see all of you. Stan Whitcombe, the developer of Connestee Falls, is here this afternoon to share some of his early stories with us. Stan started his career as a CPA with Price Waterhouse, and then he became a comptroller for Westinghouse, where he worked with James Hunt, the developer of the Coral Ridge properties in Fort Lauderdale. When Stan was just 30 years old, he and some Fort Lauderdale businessmen formed Realtek, and Realtek was the development company that developed Connestee Falls as well as some other properties. It's a true testament to this project that Stan and his wife Janie still live on property, and they are so invested in Transylvania County. Stan served on the Board of Trustees at Brevard Music Center for 13 and a half years, and he served on the North Carolina-South Carolina committee that studied Highway 276. He served on this committee with Tommy Weish, a Greenville attorney who was responsible for preserving Mountain Bridge Wilderness, the lands around Joe Cassie, and thousands of other acres all in our backyard. So Stan keeps good company. He's a developer, but he's also a conservationist. We are all so truly fortunate to have discovered Connestee Falls, and we thank Stan for the good job he did in preserving this unspoiled beauty for us.
Thanks, Mary Carol. Wow, full house. I think the thing can you hear me now? Yeah. Okay. I just have to signal him. Let's start off by finding out who's here. Are any of the board of directors here from the Homeowners Association? Okay, I can say whatever I want about them. Of the folks here, if everyone would stand for a minute, and I'd like to have you sit down based on the number of years, and I'll call them out, that you've lived in Connestee. So if you all stand, anyone that has been here 2 years or less, please sit down. Okay, 5 years or less. 10 years or less. Wow, we're getting, okay, how about 15 years? I gotta find out who. 15, how about 25 years? Boy, that 24, 2, 22. Yeah, well, we've got 1, 2, 3 people standing. I can't see over there, but how long have you been here?
30 years.
Oh, yeah. And sir?
I keep telling everybody when they ask, I tell them I'm the oldest person in Connestee Falls. They say, no, we know people that are older than you are. But the number is 47 years.
Wow.
Okay, Jim, stay standing. You got to stand up. You got to tell us your name, and you got to tell us where you live. You're going to tell us where you live, and then I'm going to give you a $50 gift certificate.
Oh, my goodness. Hi, my name is Jim Farry. We built a little second home here in 1975. Bought a couple of lots in 71. And I was into golf, and I came over and played the original golf course, and it wasn't completed by any means at that time, but there wasn't a flat spot on it, and I thought that was a great challenge, and it still is a great challenge. Thank you.
Well, thank you. And since we have someone who's been here 47 years, I'll have to go by the script. I was hoping most people were only 5 years or less, and I could tell them anything. But anyway, now we need to find out who is the most recent person to move to Connestee. Anyone here less than a month? Back there. Please stand up.
We moved today.
Whoa. That's something.
Stan, this is the lady I was telling you about who knew one of your salesmen.
Oh, you're the
Okay.
Greens
Yes.
from
Kenny Schwartz?
Kenny Schwartz. Yes, you will hear about Kenny today.
Well, he was from Cape Coral,
At one time,
and I'm from Cape Coral, and he and my father were salesmen there, and he and Kenny, my father and Kenny developed the flying in people here to see land, and I
You'll
think
hear
that's
that.
what Kenny did here as well.
He did.
Kenny Schwartz was VP of sales that I hired. I hired him because he was the best in the nation, and that's back in 1970. I went to see Kenny, and he turned me over to his lawyer, and the lawyer said, well, Kenny has a very nice position now. He was the first resident, I believe, of Cape Coral. And if anybody that knows Cape Coral, it's over 150,000 people now. And Kenny was the sales manager that went over there and worked with your dad and at Cape Coral, right? Yes. And I'll get into a little more of what happened and how I hired Kenny. I met with his lawyer, and he told me, he says, well, what are your projections? And I told him what we were going to do at Connestee. We had Connestee, and we also had Sapphire. And I'm going to come back to Kenny in a minute. Let me tell you a little bit about Realtek. Realtek was started in 1969 in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I had been with Coleridge Properties in Fort Lauderdale, which was purchased by Westinghouse, and that's why the reference to Westinghouse. And after working there as their CFO for 2 years, I got called up to Pittsburgh, and the VP Finance of Westinghouse told me he'd like me to transfer from Fort Lauderdale up to Pittsburgh. And I said, what's the position? And he said, well, I'm retiring. This is the VP Finance. And he said, we've named a new man to be VP Finance who's an engineer, a VP Finance, controller. Okay. And we want you to be Director of External Accounting. I said, what the hell is that? He said, you will be the person to deal with the outside accountants, the investment analysts, and anyone that wants to talk accounting. I said, are you telling me I'm doing his job, right? But I've got to be in another room. And yep, that's it. So I asked him, what are you going to do, Mr. Dalton, now that you're retiring? He says, well, I'm going to Fort Lauderdale. And I told him, I'm already there. And I came back to Fort Lauderdale, and the man, Mr. Hunt, that had sold Coleridge Properties to Westinghouse, was still running it. And he called me up to his office. He says, Stan, are you going to Pittsburgh? And I said, no. He said, well, you can't turn down a company like Westinghouse Electric. You know, they won't ask you again. And he said, you ought to go out and start your own company. And I said, well, Mr. Hunt, I have a wife and 3 kids and no money. And he said, let me tell you something maybe you haven't realized yet. The longer you have them, they don't get any less expensive. So he told me, he says, go out and find some guys to put up some money. I'll sell you some land on terms so you can get started. And within a couple of months, we started Realtek. I started it with 5 other guys from Fort Lauderdale. One was an attorney, one was an advertising agency, one was a developer, and then we had an architect. And Edward Durrell Stone Jr. was in land planning and had planned resorts around the world. Ed became part of our group, and Ed Stone's firm did the land plan for Connestee. Now, how does someone in Fort Lauderdale, how are they going to know where to put lots in Brevard, North Carolina? Well, the answer is we flew a topo, the aerial photograph of the land, marking out 10-foot contours in lines. So they were all over the place. And I've been asked, how did you know where to put the lakes? It becomes obvious when you look at a topo, just start and keep following a line until it either stops or connects. But if there's a little gap somewhere where you could put a dam, that's a chance you could build a lake. That's how we came up with the idea of the 4 lakes. There were only 4 places we could put lakes at that time. Another thing I've been asked is why aren't they connected? Well, because they're all at different elevations. And so when we started, I came up to North Carolina to acquire Lake Toxaway. And I had a contract signed by Reggie Heinich that owned Toxaway. And we hired an engineering firm to do the due diligence. They came back, and I was too young to know better. And they gave me a written report. They said that didn't think the dam was safe. That blew my financing. So I had to go back and tell Reggie I couldn't buy the place. Needless to say, the broker who was with me was pretty down that day as we drove up to Toxaway and told Reggie. But on the way out, he said, why don't you go next door? They'd like to sell their land too. So I said, okay, let's go. Well, I ended up signing a contract to buy Sapphire Valley, which was about 5,800 acres. And then on the way back to Brevard, the broker, now up again, said, why don't you start from scratch? And I said, well, if you can find me a couple of thousand acres, I will. So he put together 7 different owners that owned the land of Connestee. 3,900 acres is what this was, 7 owners. I never met any one of them. To this day, I never did meet them. And we bought Connestee land and the Sapphire Valley development the same day, closed at the bank downtown. And one little comical thing is we're at the bank for the closing. Ralph Ramsey was the lawyer. And all of a sudden, a guy walks in and says, I'm the broker on this sale. And I'd never seen the man, let alone know him. And the brokers all got into a battle. And I finally turned to Ralph Ramsey and said, let's you and I go to dinner. When we get back from dinner, either they've settled it or I'm going back to Fort Lauderdale. Well, they settled it. Unfortunately, the guy that had done all the work ended up with the lease from the sale. The guy that flew in from Washington had one time earlier sent a letter to my company, Realtek, offering some land somewhere, and it was one of those 7 parcels that were here. We just wrote back and said, not interested at this time, not the answer to give to a broker. So that's how we ended up at the closing. And at that closing, the owner of Sapphire Valley's wife, she cried all the way through. She did not want to sell the land. And they were wonderful people. And one of the greatest pluses in buying up Sapphire Valley was I hired one of their employees to come down here to help here. And this is the man and his wife that's been really responsible for much of Connestee Falls. And that's where he's not there, he's over here. Earl and Sharon Jenkins. You know Sharon from the Connestee? I wish they could have been with us today, but they could not. But he originally came here to move a dozer around. When we got started here, I hired a general manager from California. His name was Bob Boone. And I told Bob, number one, you must live in Connestee. I'll give you any lot. Just pick a lot, but I want you to build your house. Those of you that know the main gate, when you come up the main gate, there's a house on the right with a great view. That was not a lot. Bob created that so he could have a lot. And built his home there, and he ran the operation from the construction and so forth with Earl. Kenny Schwartz was just the head of sales. When I met with his attorney, which I mentioned, attorney said, he has to make $100,000 a year. And can he do that? And I said, well, yes, we're projecting to sell $3.3 million worth of property the first year. So I'll give Kenny a 3 1/3 override, 3 1/3% on sales. So Kenny went out and he did a fantastic job of not only hiring the salespeople here, but also staffed offices in various cities in the Southeast. And he also did all our advertising as well. That first year, we did $10.5 million in sales. Kenny did well, a lot better than Cape Coral. And Kenny was with us, was a close friend till he passed away a couple of years ago, but he was always very involved with Connestee. How did I end up even looking in North Carolina? It all came about because I grew up outside of Boston and used to spend the summers in New Hampshire and Maine. And after my parents passed and we sold the summer place we had up there, I missed New Hampshire. And the advertising man that was one of our 5 said, go look at North Carolina, it looks the same. So I flew up here, but I found there was a big difference. And the big difference up here was freedom. This town was fantastic. North Carolina was fantastic, and so was South Carolina. I went downtown in Brevard to find out from the planning department what we could do. And coming from Fort Lauderdale, I knew you had to have a planning department and I'd have to deal with a whole bunch of bureaucrats. Well, they said, we don't have a planning department. I said, okay. How about your zoning director? Zoning? We don't have zoning. And finally, the guy said, what do you want to do? And I told him what I want to do. I want to build a 3,900-acre development with 4 lakes and a golf course. He said, well, let me ask you, are you going to put in a liquor store? And I said, no. And he said, then go do what you want. As you all know, liquor is controlled by the state, and so he didn't want me breaking that law. The only approvals we needed here were the dams had to be inspected and approved by the state. And that was not a complicated affair. It was a wonderful experience here. As we went on, developing both Sapphire and Connestee, we also became involved in Lake Kiwi in South Carolina, which was owned by Duke Power Company. And Duke put a 350-mile shoreline lake. They just went up the valley and cleaned out everything. So we made the deal with Duke and Eddie Albert. Now I'm going to ask, does everybody here know Eddie Albert by? Because an awful lot of people have told me, who's he? Who was he? I actually hired Eddie Albert for an earlier project prior to Connestee in Florida. That one did not go well. We just did test marketing and killed the idea. We were building ranchettes for people that wanted to get out with the animals. And so then when we came up here, Eddie came up and did the promotion. And he was wonderful to work with. We traveled around to different cities doing PR pieces on TV and radio. And then one night, we were at the Hunter House, which was the only house here when we started. And he said, can we go somewhere where I wouldn't be known to go to for dinner? And I said, whoa, that's a tall order, because Green Acres was still very popular in the early 70s. Anyway, so I said, yeah, I think I know. So I called one of the men that worked up at Sapphire Valley, who owned a little restaurant on the way between Toxaway and Sapphire. There's a little Lake Toxaway Motel, and it had a little restaurant with 5 tables. So we went up there. I called. She said, just 2 of us coming. I didn't tell him who I was bringing because he probably wouldn't know him anyway. So we walked in. The minute we walked in, there's a scream like somebody had been shot. And the guy says, Whitcombe, he says, my wife's on the floor in the kitchen. I don't know that you're going to get any food, but her favorite actor is Eddie Albert. So Eddie Albert went in the kitchen, got her off the floor, got her up, and they didn't have a menu. You just ate whatever she served. And we had a wonderful meal. the next day, the owner calls me up and he says, "Whitcombe, you son of a bitch." I said, "What did I do?" He says, "When are you coming up this way?" I said, "I'll be up there this afternoon. Come by." So I went by, and I walk in. He says, "We only had 5 tables. Look over there." There was a roped-off Eddie Albert table with his silverware, the plate, everything. He says, "She won't disturb it." It's no longer a restaurant. But it was a great experience working with him. And when we started to go to Kiwi and to try to win the joint venture with Duke Power, Duke Power had already heard that he's an environmentalist. And he was very serious. I didn't know it when we hired him at the time. Anyway, so Eddie and I drove down to Kiwi, and there's Strom Thurmond, and there's the governor, and there's the president of Duke, and they're taking us on a tour of the nuclear plant. Well, we're inside, and all we see is pipes and turret. We know what's going on. And Eddie calls me over. He says, "Do you think anybody knows what's going on here?" Anyway, we won the right to develop it, and that was our 3rd project in the Carolinas. So that's the story with Eddie Albert, and we stayed in touch as long as he was alive. He passed away, I think, about 10 years ago, but very successful. And his wife, Margot, also very successful. She negotiated with utility companies in Los Angeles to get easements under the power lines, and she created gardens for Mexican kids in Los Angeles. She was Mexican, and she did a very successful job of building a whole organization so that the kids would all have gardens. So anyway, that's the Eddie Albert story. I mentioned Edward Durrell Stone. He was a close friend, but his firm did the topo here, and they would oversee engineering and all the other aspects of the development. Edward Durrell Stone Sr. was the architect that did the General Motors building in New York, Standard Oil's building in Chicago, Kennedy Center. So he was well known. His son was also well known all over the world for doing resort developments. And we were very fortunate to have Ed as part of our team. Let's see, I also, when we came up here, there were 2 of us that had been in development. And Gil Edwards, who was kind of senior partner at the beginning, he said, "I'll take Sapphire, you go start Connestee." Now, Sapphire already had a golf course, a 100-room, 100-year-old hotel, and we were going to build condominiums up there, and we did. When we had very successful sales of the condominiums, but then we had to build them. And in October of that same year, Gil called me and said, "Listen, I can't take cold weather. I'm going back to Fort Lauderdale. It's all yours." So in October of '61, I got the rest of it. And it was a lot of fun. We had a great team, and I have a telephone directory of Realtek. I didn't realize we had so many people, but there's about 500 people that were listed in here. Every development has some big negatives. The first negative we had was the topo. We created Unit 1. This is the map for Unit 1 of Connestee Falls. And all of the streets, this is the original names of all the streets. They're all Southern generals. Now, we probably would have run out of those. But Bob Boone, while I was down in Lauderdale, got with Mrs. McCrary downtown, and they had the signs made for the roads. Miss McCrary had sold Bob on Cherokee names. So I happened to live on Jackson Drive, which is now Connestee Trail. But if you live in Unit 1, you're on here with a Southern general name. Then Bob changed them all to Cherokees. And several times over the years, we've had people want to get rid of the Cherokee names. But as you all know, you're well known anywhere if you give a Connestee address. We've even had one, I think, came to Linda, I think it was Linda Hysong's real estate office and asked if she could buy a vowel. We thought about selling them, but we didn't. So that's the picture, and I want to hit on a couple of items. One is, when we created it, we had, down at the entrance, we built these units. We flew people up on DC-3 airplanes out of Florida and South Carolina and other areas. We had Ohio and so forth. We built 10 of these Rondette units. Each one had 2 bedroom suites. So we fly the people into Asheville Airport. At the airport, they were picked up on buses and brought down to Connestee. That building here, the real estate office that's over down at the entrance down towards the falls, this is the building that was there. We built a restaurant over the creek, and all of the folks would come in, check into the hotel. We then would bring them here and serve them dinner, and then we'd take them up the hill to, this building was up on top of the falls, looking right down into the falls, and that was our sales office. And they didn't have to walk up there. We had princesses. We had young ladies that were all dressed up like princesses, and they drove golf carts and took all the people up to the sales office. And here's one of our salesmen. And we had Jeeps for transportation. Every salesman had a Jeep, with the exception of one that drove a Jaguar convertible, but that's, anyway. These guys would take the people out on the land, and we had walkie-talkies back to base and would show them land. One of our salesmen, Mike Hendricks, who's not in that picture, maybe, yes he is, but this was down where the sales office is today for one of the other realtors. And then we had the signs there, welcome to Connestee Falls, and then they would take them out on the property, call back to base. We had someone with all of the lot in front of them on a big map, and reserve. Those are those places where they spent the night. The restaurants to the right, and the princesses would take them in these golf carts up the hill. Then they'd get in the Jeep, ride out on the property. We didn't insist that someone had to go out on the property when the day they arrived. We wanted them to get comfortable, get used to the mountains, and so we'd let them go on their own. If they wanted to go to town, we'd tell people to take them to town. But anyway, that's where we started, and we started in late 71, and this is the gentleman on the right with the burgundy pants is Jack Bryant. Jack Bryant was a road builder, but he did all of the site work here. The man in the middle is Jim Parker. He was the executive vice president of Certainteed Products. And we started the company in Realtech. 18 months later, sold half of the company, 57%, to Certainteed. And Certainteed provided the funding for Connestee and Sapphire. And on the left there is that good-looking young man. That's me. Anyway. Jim Parker was the man I dealt with on Certainteed. I met him, of all places, in Barbados at a real estate conference. And he had just joined Certainteed. They had purchased 3 home builders, but they didn't have any land developers. And he wanted to know if I would sell the company. And I said, no, but we would talk about ventures. His wife is, and let's see, it's the Boys and Girls Club in Brevard is called, what is it? Yes. And Platt.
That's her daddy.
Yeah, this is her dad. Platt is married to Parker, and that's Eddie Albert. He wasn't involved in that. But there's a...
Jim Parker is Woody Platt, the Steep Canyon Rangers' grandfather. Jim Parker is Cindy Platt's father.
Yes,
And
yes.
he's the grandfather of Woody Platt.
Woody Platt.
A local musician, and also Parker Platt,
Yep.
who's a well-known architect.
Yes.
And the father-in-law of Al Platt, who's is running for state representative, maybe? Have I got that right?
Well-known architect here in Brevard, and a great guy. He reminds me every time I see him that when he first met me, being from Fort Lauderdale, he said, I showed up with Eddie Albert, and I had a 1970 red Cadillac convertible. And I was told by some of the local people that that was a good Florida car, but you might want to have something else up here. So I bought a dark green Mercedes, and they didn't know what that was either, but it was acceptable. Now you've seen the Rondettes. I'm trying to follow the slides, and I just want to make sure that you've seen the parking lot, and you've seen Jim Parker. And what made this project very different was more than half of the land is natural and left in its natural state. We built 52 miles of roads. Now, during that time, one of the problems we had was road rock was expensive. But I had an in-house engineer that said we could save a lot of money if we would buy a rock crusher and put it below a stone wall we had. It wasn't a stone wall, it was a cliff. And we could put blastings in that, bring down some of the rock, and then put it through the crusher. We'd have plenty of road rock. Sounded great. Ran the numbers. We bought the crusher, and we put it to where they now store RVs and things, the one off of Ugugu. And we put the dynamite in and set it off. The rock here is different than sapphire. The rock here can be busted up with a backhoe. You didn't need blast. The whole wall came down and crushed the crusher. Needless to say, that engineer was not with us the next day. He survived that, but he didn't survive me. Another event happening is Mike Hendricks, the guy that built the log house in unit number 1, was the second resident of Connestee Falls after Mrs. Shelton, who had the first house. And they had the first baby. I tried to find, he'd be 51 years old, and I thought maybe we could find him and have him here. But anyway, I don't know, wasn't able to get hold of him. And Mike Hendricks was on our sales force, and he was showing someone the falls. And I don't know whether you can show the picture of the falls again, but if you can. Let's see, there. He was standing at the very top of the falls, and we had steps going down the far side, about halfway down. So that people could go down, and we'd have them stand on that flat area and take their picture. Well, Mike stepped on a rock that flipped, and he got flipped over the falls. He landed at that flat area, but over to the left. Fortunately, he landed in a rhododendron bush. They took him to the hospital. I went down there, and I walked in and said, Mike, how you doing? He said, Mr. Whitcombe, you want me to do it again? It's going to cost you big. Mike also took some folks out to sell them a lot. And when they were out there on the lot, the man and his wife, and she saw a snake. And she was concerned, obviously. Mike says, don't move. Went back to his truck, got his gun, came out, shot the snake, and they bought that lot. I figured he got the only snake. Anyway, so that was, and then as the development went on, we had some battles. We had a big battle over Kuala Village. Kuala Village was going to be a multifamily and duplexes and so forth. But we hadn't set it up that way originally. Now, we did have multifamily land. We had several sites here that were going to be condominiums. And unfortunately, they were, some of you folks live on multifamily land. Next to the clubhouse, the hill back here was going to be condominiums. Over where you go across the bridge on Atagahi, there is a condominium there, but there were going to be others along the west side. And then over on Toccoa, there was another large area. But future boards decided that they'd just let them go as single family and not get into condominium development. So that's how that came about. The other thing I'd like to tell you is the story of the church. When I bought the land, there was one church, the existing church that's out there, and there was also one house way out in the back 40, which we known as the Hunter House. I went to the church and said, in order for us to build the lake we want to build, the topo shows us that we're going to flood your road. So we made a deal with the church. And the road to the church, when you come up East Fork Gate, you come to the first right, there's a driveway there that goes down. That was the old road to the church. Went down bottom where the lake is and came up on the, if you looked at the church, to the left of the church where that big middle building is now. We sold them on the idea. They loved it. We gave them the right to use the beach at Atagahi. And so that's the reason why the church is still here. In order to make the deal, I had to agree to put a new roof on the church and new siding. And I thought that it'll look really nice with a nice white church. But Bob Boone painted it green. It didn't last long at green, but he ran a great operation, but I think he was colorblind. So that's pretty much the story. I left Connestee in 1975. I was away for about 3 years. I still had a home here. And then in 78, I built a second home here. And then I built a third home on Lake Atagahi, which I never lived in because someone offered me enough that I sold it. And we now live on Connestee Trail up by the water tower. So with that, I will stop and see if anyone has any questions. I think we did get a couple of questions in writing. Yes, sir.
When you bought this beautiful mountain, what did you pay for it, and what is it worth today?
Well, now you get into all those folks that live in multifamily land may have to move so I can build the condominiums. So I don't know what the value is today, but I paid a pretty big number. About 15 years ago, I was asked that same question, so I went down to the county and dug out the old deeds. I paid $350 an acre. But I would tell you that lots, to develop the lots today, would be between $30,000 and $40,000 per lot, because that's what it costs, sewer and water. Now, sewer is, not everyone has sewer. You have sewer if your lot drains towards a lake, then you're on sewer. If it drains off into running off, then it's you may be and probably are on septic tanks. But we did build the sewer system and the water system and then sold it early on. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Thank you, the foresight to put all of those wires and telephone things underground.
Well, I would like to take credit for being smart, but that wasn't the case. The question is the power lines and telephones and so forth all being underground. They're underground because when I would go with my parents up to their place in Lake Sunapee, New Hampshire, we couldn't afford a lot on the lake. We were on the other side of the road, which was up on a little hillside. And every time you sat on the porch to look out at the lake, you were looking through power lines. And I swore that when I did development, I would never have power lines. And so far today, I've never had power. There's no power lines here. There's not a Sapphire, not a Kiwi, and Oceanage in Fort Lauderdale. They've always been underground. Duke fought us, but agreed. But it was a battle to get them to put on the line because they said, nobody does it. They said, it's in the woods. You're not going to see them. I still want them underground. Yes, sir.
What determined service by Duke versus Haywood EMC?
The lines were developed by the state years ago, and it just happened that part of the land was Duke, and the others Hayward Electric. Yeah, that's the only reason we didn't have any choice. We had to negotiate with both of them. So, yes, sir.
The overlook area after you come in the main gate, that's now landscape and everything else, how long did it take you to develop that? Or that's something you did right at the beginning?
That's thanks to the gardeners of Connestee. We didn't do anything there. There was a view, but we didn't improve it. It's been beautifully done by residents from Connestee. And I would also say we should give a lot of credit to not only to Earl, not only to Jim, and to the folks that have run this place to keep it with the trails, and a lot more trails than we had, maybe 5 to 7 miles. I don't know how much, 15 or 20 miles now. So it's thanks to the residents that have done that work. All volunteers, as far as I know. One more question over here.
When you were developing this, did you ever think as we were getting older that we would have loved for you to have put an old folks' home somewhere?
Yes, in fact, we had a spot we were going to develop it, and then we found out College Walk had come in, and there were a couple of others, and so we just decided, no, that's not our thing. So that's why we've had residents come and ask, but that's what happened. Yes, sir.
Could you describe when you made the lakes and dammed them up, what was in those valleys? Did the trees have to come down? Just describe that process to us.
We made the determination that, first of all, we're not going to allow any power motors on there other than electric. We cleaned the trees. We took them down. We had a problem because when you cleared here, the soil is very fine. We put all the plastic around, to the barriers, but they didn't do a bit of good. And we made both of those rivers look like chocolate milkshake. And we filled up all of the lakes of the camps downstream. And then we ended up making deals with the camp owners to take a year off. We paid their income for the year through our insurance agency. But we cleared all of the lakes because we didn't want stumps breaking loose and coming up and hitting someone, or hitting a boat. So there was one or two more? Yes, sir.
I have been told that some of those 7 families that own the property here were involved in very lucrative bootlegging business. Is there any truth to that story?
Not that I know of, but there were stills in the area. There was one in the back of where I live now. But I never heard any of that. Only recent. Yes?
How did they come up with this site for the clubhouse?
How what?
How did they come up with this site for the clubhouse?
New site for the clubhouse?
This site. How did they get this site?
Oh. How do we come up with a site? Central to the overall area was what our intent was. And we designed, there's about half of the old clubhouse is still here. There was a big discussion about building a new clubhouse about 10 years ago, and that went on for several years, but didn't happen. And then they added the big dining room, and then this area was another addition. But that's, as to the location, it's just central to the overall community. One or two more? Yes?
I understand there were plans for a large shopping center at the main entrance to everything. What's the current on that?
I know of no plans for shopping center in Connestee. The closest to that would be down where we had the restaurant and the rondettes. We did have drawn some sketches on building some commercial in there, but it never came about. Yes, ma'am?
Did you consider ever putting in a separate water system?
You have a separate water system. The water system here is a water company that we created.
Oh, okay, that's sold.
We sold it. but that was a water system created just for Connestee, and so the same with the sewer. And kind of our motto was, there's no right way, try to stay as far away from the wrong way as possible. And that's the way we ran. Yes, sir.
So the infrastructure here is 50 years old. Do you expect, do we need to renew it, or do you think the infrastructure, the dams and the water and the underground utilities will last another 50 years?
Well, the water system, as you know, has had a lot of stuff replaced. The sewer, not so much, but the water system, those pipes have served their life, and they're being replaced by that company. As to the clubhouse, that's always an ongoing discussion. Somebody wants a new one, someone wants the older one. So I would say that's up to the residents and the board. The golf course is in better shape than it's ever been, and that's thanks to Jim and the team. They've really done a nice job in getting that in good shape. And I'll tell you one thing about the golf course. When I walked the course with George Cobb when we were building it, and the 9 holes, the first 9 and the second 9 were reversed about 10 years after we built it. And I walked the course, I said, hole number 1, and I said, we can't see the green. He said, that's okay. And then we got to hole number 2, which is now 11. And I stood there and I said, George, I said, can anybody play this? And he said, well, you want a challenging course. I said, yeah, but I don't play golf. And then we got to 14, and I said, you got to move this tee 100 yards that way. He said, why? I said, look at the view of the mountains. I said, you know what I can get for this lot? So he said to me, he says, Stan, let me have this one view. I said, I better not find another one. And of course we didn't. George Cobb was a great guy to work with. And he's, he did the par 3 at Augusta, and he did Sapphire Valley. And because he had done the original course at Sapphire, that's why we used him. He was just a great guy to deal with. So if there are any other questions, otherwise I'll turn it over to Rick. I want to tell you, this gal has done a fabulous job on the history of this place. Yeah. Thank you. Oh, the logo. There's been 3 logos because people have asked about it. The original logo was over here in the right-hand corner, the waterfall, which you'll see at one of the real estate offices. And then the second logo was for the 40th anniversary, and it was really designed by the artists of Connestee Falls. They had a contest to determine it. And now we have the new, that's the one that was designed by the art people that live here. And the new one, I don't know who. That's that. Anyway. I would have asked the board, but I don't know who did that. Okay. Oh, yeah. I've got yours. There you go. Yeah. Good.
Thanks, Dan. Wasn't that great? Usually in these presentations, Earl Jenkins is always here, and Stan told you about him. He was hired in 1971 to drive the bulldozer, and then when he retired in 2016, he was director of operations. Several times he served as GM when we didn't have a general manager, and his wife Sharon worked at administration a long, long time too, and right before Mr. Whitcombe came, she was our acting general manager. She just retired a few months ago. Earl couldn't be with us this evening because of some family COVID things. But if you see him, Stan showed you this. This is him. And they like to eat at Pisgah Fish Camp. So if you see him, please tell him hello and introduce yourself. Sharon and Earl's life was Connestee Falls. They lived down across the street from Mud Dabbers in 2 sweet little white houses. Okay, so in our archives, we found this 2003 video that Earl did. It's 11 minutes long, and we think it's so good, we really think that you'll enjoy seeing it. So if you can just hang in here another 11 minutes, okay?
Hello, my name's Earl Jenkins. I'm the assistant manager, maintenance superintendent. Started to work at Connestee Falls March of 1971 for Connestee Falls Development Corporation. March 14th, 1975, I became the maintenance superintendent, and guess what? I've been here ever since. Hope y'all enjoy the pictures that we've took over the years. We've definitely enjoyed the work here and plan on staying a while longer.
The History and Archives Committee is tasked with preserving the programs and photographs and brochures related to the history of Connestee Falls, and all of that is stored in a cabinet outside the door to the Wellness Center downstairs. There's 72 albums so far. Some of them are up here today for you to look at. That cabinet is left unlocked. You're welcome to get into it anytime that you would like. We just can't take any of those items from that area. It was so nice being with all of you this afternoon, and we hope that you enjoyed the program.
So different, so do you remember the